Well, if it's not, I'll just yell. Oh, here he is. I always ask for audio stuff the second you walk away. Yeah, is this live out here? It's on. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is a great turnout. We're just about 10 minutes away from the start of Joan Donovan's lecture. So if you don't mind starting to make your way into the conference room, we'll get started shortly. Thanks so much.
Yeah, okay. And I think we'll probably just be using this when I do the Q&A at the end, because I'm reading the online questions, because otherwise I'll be at the podium. So.
Okay,
yeah.
Easy.
All right, thanks. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Benjamin Wu, and I'm the Associate Director of the School of Journalism and Communication and the head of the Communication and Media Studies program here at Carleton University. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 15th Annual Attallah Lecture, Meme War 2024, Networked Incitement in the Static Age, presented by Dr. Joan Donovan, Assistant Professor of Journalism and Emerging Media Studies at Boston University. As many of you, I hope, know, Professor Donovan was unfortunately unable to join us in person due to a last-minute travel issue. But we are rolling with the punches and glad that so many of you have been able to join us here in Richcraft Hall or online via the live stream for the first ever Attallah Watch Party. Before going any further, however, I do want to take a moment and acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional, unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. As much could be said about any number of events taking place tonight across what is now central Canada. But what about this land in particular, where we gather tonight? Much of the land on which Carleton's campus is located was donated or sold to the university by our first chancellor, Harry Stevenson Southam, and his brother, Wilson Mills Southam. The Southams made their fortune as newspaper publishers, including of the Ottawa Citizen. And so it was wealth derived from the newspaper, their newspaper chain, from communications, that enabled them to acquire these parcels of land between Dow's Lake and the Rideau River. I think about this history often as an important reminder that far from merely recording, representing, or providing a venue for debates about colonialism, media and higher education alike have been active participants in and beneficiaries of the historic and ongoing dispossession of Indigenous peoples here in Canada and around the world. With this in mind, I offer my respects and thanks to the elders, past, present, and future, who have been the custodians of this land since time immemorial. I sincerely hope that the exchange of ideas and knowledge can also be part of a path towards a just reconciliation and right relationship between settler Canadians and the Indigenous peoples of the land we now share. I'd now like to invite Dean Brenda O'Neill to come to the stage and offer some words of welcome from the Faculty of Public and Global Affairs.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. When I read the description of the lecture, tonight's lecture, I said to myself that I couldn't imagine a more timely time to have this kind of a discussion, given that the American election is just around the corner and that a federal election is likely to happen very soon here in Canada. The annual Attallah Lecture, named in honor of the late Paul Attallah, is a vehicle for demonstrating the importance of Carleton's Communication and Media Studies program by showing how questions about the flow of information, opinions, and arguments are central to many of the biggest questions of the day. In our faculty's new strategic plan, Lead, Connect, Transform, we acknowledge the challenges that we're facing in this complicated world and the wicked problems we're struggling with. I truly believe that events like tonight's shine a light on those difficult problems, helping us to gain a richer understanding that hopefully leads us to solutions. I, for one, am looking forward to listening this evening I'm glad I'm here for the first watch party, as I'm sure all of you are as well. Thank you again for being here this evening, and I hope you enjoy the lecture. This is, yeah.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Now it's time for me to thank and acknowledge some of the people without whom tonight's event would not be possible. The Attallah Lecture is made possible by the School of Journalism and Communications Kesterton Endowment. I want to thank Jamie Sadgrove, our Communications and Events Coordinator, for all of their hard work to organize it, to my colleagues on the Comms Program Culture Committee, to Noor and Sydney from the Dean's Office, and Faith and Izzy from the Carleton Communication Society, to the Department of University Advancement for helping us get the word out, to Carleton's dining services staff for the reception we just enjoyed, and most especially to our friends from TLS Production Services. They always do an amazing job supporting our AV needs for events like this, but they particularly came through for us tonight, and we're really grateful. My colleague, Professor Cheryl Hamilton, will now say a few words about Professor Paul Attallah, in whose memory we offer this annual lecture. Cheryl.
So the Communication and Media Studies program's annual flagship lecture, or watch party, is named for our departed colleague, Paul Attallah. Paul served as the Associate Director of the School of Journalism and Communication and head of what is now the Communication and Media Studies program, then the Mass Communication program, from 1991 to 2005, which for any of you who've done administration is a long time. During that time period, the program grew exponentially, and we launched an MA and PhD program. Typically, in remembrance of senior scholars, this is the point where I would wow you with a list, a slice of the most notable of a very long list of publications privileging the book, of course. But in contrast to that model of intellectual work, Paul's preference was the essay, written and oral. As a result, he published less than many of us who want to share his insights with more widely would have wished he'd done. That said, Paul did write 2 volumes on communication theory in French that were taught for decades in Francophone comms programs, and he co-edited with Leslie Reagan Shade the first 2 editions of a field mapping textbook in English for allophone communication studies called Mediascapes. Both texts shaped the knowledge of generations of Canadian communications and media studies students. It's fitting that much of Paul's published output took the form that it did in relation to his dedication to teaching. I know, bizarrely, through a bizarre set of circumstances, what an incredible teacher he was, because I had the pleasure of taking his Introduction to Mass Communication course, the first-year course, many, many years ago. A consummate weaver of stories and critique and theory, week after week, he held the class of 350 first-year students enthralled. We hung on his every word, and he made every word worth it. Thousands of people, literally, with BAs, MAs, and PhDs from Carleton in communication owe their understanding of media history, communication theory, and the complexities of their mediascape to Paul. And woe betide any of us who, in his presence, reproduced facile cultural nationalism, or performed uncritical Canadian moral sanctimony, particularly vis-a-vis the United States, or discounted the agency of audience members, or adopted a haughty stance towards popular culture. More personally, it is directly due to Paul's efforts that I am at Carleton, and I will never forget that. Paul's most enduring media love was, alas, not memes, but was television. And would that I was able to join him at the bar at Vaughan's just up Bank Street, sip my glass of red wine, and discuss with him again the current state of television and this place we call Canada and the world. It would be, as all conversations about media and current affairs were with Paul, fascinating and illuminating. Paul was, after all, very well known for his sharp mind, his sharp wit, and an equally sharp tongue. He would listen attentively to your argument, think for a moment, and then quietly say, "So would it be fair to say?" At that point, you had a choice. If you said yes, you had conceded you were wrong, and the conversation would dwindle away. If you said, no, I don't think it would be fair to say, things would get lively. Knowing Paul, you might still be wrong, but it would be a lot more fun. In 2009, Paul passed away from liver cancer at the far too young age of 54. We remember him annually with this lecture that bears his name, and while he wouldn't have agreed with the arguments of every speaker that we've hosted, he would have attended every time and always enjoyed the conversation. Tonight, we are in for a treat. After Dr. Donovan's talk in the Q&A, I invite you to grab a couple of friends, repair to a convivial location, and have a rousing discussion of ideas. I can think of no better way to honor Dr. Paul Attallah's memory. Thank you.
Finally, I'll ask Professor Merlina Lim to come up and introduce tonight's speaker, at which point the main event will begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So introducing this evening's speaker is a bit like introducing a rock star of the digital age, but one who swaps guitar for memes and takes down this information with the precision of a social scientist. Dr. Joan Donovan is currently an assistant professor of journalism and emerging media study at Boston University. She's also the founder of the Critical Internet Studies Institute, dedicating to building an internet that actually puts community safety and privacy first. The kind of internet we all wish we had. In 2022, with Emily Dreyfus and Brian Friedberg, she co-authored Meme Wars, the untold story of the online battles offending democracy in America, a book that will have you double-checking your memes before you share them. Dr. Donovan completed her PhD in sociology and science study at UC San Diego and did her postdoc at UCLA, where she researched how white supremacists use DNA, a sensory test, social movements, technology. Formerly, Dr. Donovan was the research director at the Harvard Sorenstein Center on Media Politics and Public Policy, where she led groundbreaking work on media manipulation and adversarial media movements. Prior to that, she was the research lead for Data and Society Media Manipulation Initiative, mapping out the ways interest groups and political operatives use the internet and media to disrupt social institutions. Oh, a very important fact, Dr. Donovan is one of the brilliant minds behind the beaver emoji. That's a very important contribution to Canada. Yes, really. When she's not busy unraveling the tangled web of disinformation or lecturing on the darker corners of the internet, you might find her hanging out with her two cats, who I imagine probably have some pretty strong opinions on memes too. So buckle up, because when it comes to understanding the intersection of memes and politics, there is no one better to lead the conversation. Please join me in welcoming the 2024 Attallah Lecture speaker, Dr. Joan Donovan.
All right, can you all hear me okay? Sure can, yep. I'm just, if Colin can tell me. Sounds good. All right, I got the big thumbs up. We're looking good, feeling good. I want to say thank you. I was up at the crack of dawn, ready to get on the plane, and something to do with my passport is not expired, but it's not current enough for me to enter Canada, which is confounding. I think if I had driven, it probably would have been better. And I'm also a alumni of Concordia University in Montreal. I did my undergraduate degree there and my master's degree there, and I do owe quite a debt of gratitude to my professors in Canada for helping me see the world differently, also helping me experience politics in a different way. Having been born and raised in America, you don't realize how different a place like Canada really is until you immerse yourself in it. And especially that francophone Quebecois culture, very different. So today I'm going to talk pretty quickly about meme wars in this 2024 election. I'm going to do a little bit of background and scene setting so that we're all level set. And then we will discuss a very current event that's happening here in the run up to the election in November. And so when I'm talking about meme wars, I'm really talking about essentially battles over narrative. So memetic war is the use of slogans, images, and video on social media in persuasive political campaigns. So it's not quite propaganda because it's not all coming from the state. And it's also not quite simply tabloid-esque lies, although that kind of clickbait exists. There's something else going on here where you do have people, whether they are government operatives or they're PR specialists or they're people that have been interested on a particular social issue. They might use a meme campaign or a meme war to raise awareness. But what I've been charting over the last decade or more is this move from essentially a politics of technology as liberation to a politics of technology as playing a very big role in political oppression. And one of the ways I see this happening is through memes. So to study memes is a artifact of our communication environment is something that there's not a ton of scholarship on it. And so I always like to have a challenge in front of me. And I always pick really bizarre stuff to dig into. But my major animating question across all of my scholarship has been, how do people use technology to get something done, right? And so how does technology play a role in collective action, good, bad, or indifferent? And in 2010, 2011, I was studying networked social movements and the rise of Occupy. And 2014, I was studying Black Lives Matter. And from there, I studied Standing Rock. And so I have a very vast background in what we might say civil rights or pro-social movements. But in my career, I really switched to looking at the dark arts of meme wars when I started looking at white supremacists' use of the internet, and in particular, how they talked about DNA ancestry testing. So that's where my background is, and I'm happy to field questions about any of these things. And I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to be there in person because I'd been telling Benjamin I was so excited to go back to the Elgin Street Diner and have some poutine and enjoy it up there. But I'm going to come back. I said to him, I'll come back for Poutine Fest in May, and we'll kick it then. So hopefully this is just the first of more engagements with my scholarship. And I do think that Canada is a really important place to get good policy done on governing the internet. So when meme wars are happening, often we don't really play in them unless they really animate or spark some kind of emotional reaction. Memes tend to do their best when they're authorless. So a lot of political campaigning that looks like a meme, but has, the logo of a politician in the corner, or a logo of a political party, those get shared less because there's obviously a point to it. There's some kind of authorship or endorsement implicit. Memes also split people between in-groups and out-groups. So every subculture has their own set of memes and ways of talking about the subculture that if you just happen to be in earshot of that conversation, you might think you're listening to almost someone talking in a foreign language. As well, memes owe their character of being memorable to this sense of stickiness, which a lot of you advertising students might talk about a lot. So hence, political memes follow the same logic as advertising memes. Advertising usually tries to get a slogan into 3 words like I'm loving it or just doing it. And that's supposed to spark your memory so that you know what brand it's affiliated with. So sticky memes tend to have that same kind of flow, like lock her up, build the wall. And then lastly, memes, especially online, are highly participatory. That is, people will take them and they'll remix them and they'll do as much as they can to make them their own and make you feel like you're part of the in-group if you're sharing it. And if it's something you just glance upon and you're in the out group, you just keep scrolling, right? You see advertisements and other things all day long that you scroll through. So you might be seeing memes that are very deeply symbolic, but you might not know what it is it's signifying. But when memes have these 4 characteristics together, they tend to go very viral. And so the reason why I talk about networked incitement, which I will define later in the static age, is because I don't think the characterizations of information overload are really actually getting at what we experience when we go on the internet, particularly social media. It's much more like there's an always on hum and we're looking for signal. So this is a picture of the early hack of Max Headroom, where it was a hack of a television station, and it was just this fuzzy figure that appeared on the screen and then disappeared, and people didn't really know what was going on. But it was definitely this moment where information activists had figured out how they might broadcast and take over the local station. And this was back in 1987. Now I would argue that we are in a world where we are looking for signal, and there are all of these different actors that are just kind of popping up and disappearing in different ways. And there's a lot of explanation that needs to happen. But of course, living in the static age, sometimes we have trouble even going back to find the thing that that caught our attention in the first place. So I also think about this through the lens of anthropology of technical systems. So I lean on the work of Chris Kelty at UCLA, who talks about in his book 2 Bits how geeks produce moral and technical order. So it's not the case that someone just designs a technology and says, this is great, put it on the market. When people are thinking about design, especially design of social systems, of communication systems, he argues that geeks fashion together both technology, principally software, hardware, networks, and protocols, with an imagination of the proper order of collective political and commercial action. That is, of how economy and society should be ordered collectively. Nowhere is this more apparent than in social media, especially with the way in which ranking and sorting algorithms and trending topics have been re-engineered almost, if not weekly, yearly. There's been major changes to the algorithms of all of these important platforms like Facebook and Threads and Instagram. All of these products that are made by Meta are designed to dampen or suppress political information because they do not allow for the recommendation of political information in their algorithms. And so as a result, journalists that have moved to these platforms, particularly Threads, are finding that their engagement with their audiences is very, very low unless they're posting things that have a very positive social quota, kittens and puppies instead of crime and justice. The other thing that's happening in social media, of course, is Musk's takeover of Twitter. Musk was very clear at the outset that he was willing to overpay for Twitter, not necessarily because it was a sound decision, financially, but rather that he understood how important Twitter was to the social organization of, let's say, progressive and left politics in the US, as well as to mainstream media and more mainstream journalists. And so when you start to see that tech companies are actively engaging in the amplification or they're turning down the volume on politics, you start to see actually many more memes pop up because people are going to hedge. They're going to hedge that this is just a joke. They're going to hedge that this is irony, and they're going to try to circumvent these bans any way that they can. So when I talk about going down the rabbit hole, I mean something very specific, which is going down the rabbit hole refers to learning about an online subculture where the keywords, slang, values, and norms are unfamiliar, but nevertheless, the content is plentiful and engrossing. And so one of the couple of hashtags that started trending during the Trump's big debate with Kamala Harris had to do with these really weird terms, Groyper and America First. And this was because there was a group on another platform. So they were on a platform called Rumble, and they were broadcasting a live stream, which was headed up by this man, Nick Fuentes, who's in the chapter of Meme Wars about Joker politics, about a sort of nihilistic Gen Z take on conservative messaging. And his fans call themselves Groypers. It's a crossover between goy and grope, which is disgusting in and of itself. And they also refer to themselves as America First or America First Patriots. So on Twitter, these terms started to trend as Trump and Kamala were debating, because on another platform, Fuentes was telling his 27,000 viewers to go and manipulate the algorithms on X and on Truth Social. And I can send, if you're interested in the content and want to see what that looks like, I could certainly send you a link to the few minutes of manipulation that they were doing. But what it showed very clearly is this advancement in the meme wars, where people are now calling into action large groups of protest online in the moment, where they can be collectively effective. That's much more like, it's much less like information mercenaries, where there's a few people, and it's much more like a brigade, because they're behaving in concert. And so when information is delivered down a rabbit hole, there are a few very important things to consider. And I call these the 4 R's. When we're getting our content delivered by algorithm, what we tend to see once we've searched for something is repetition. That is, we start to see the same thing over and over on a platform because we've told that platform through searching that we're interested in it. Then we start to see redundancy. We start seeing the same thing across different platforms because there are some interdependencies between these platforms. For instance, Facebook is all over the internet, as is Google. Responsiveness, that is, it refers to the way that social media and search engines provide some answer and even direct connections to extremists. So when you ask a question of Google, for instance, depending on how you word it, like, who are the groypers, you might be brought directly to Nick Fuentes' content in his channels about white supremacy. As well, if you ask that question on social media, you're likely to be put directly in touch with people who support that messaging. Reinforcement is lastly probably the most important part of the mechanics here, which is it refers to the way that algorithms work to connect people and content so that once you've searched for a slogan or keyword, algorithms will reinforce those interests. And so these four things taken together, seeing the content repetitiously, seeing it in more than one place redundantly, having your questions answered, that is, there's some responsiveness between either the social media system or other people on social media. And lastly, that all of that is remembered by the systems that you've been typing away on and searching and watching through as a signal that you are interested. Where this gets complicated is there's no button to say, I've had enough QAnon, right? I've had enough flat earth, right? You have to then remake, your accounts and probably clear your browser, et cetera. It becomes very, very difficult to get rid of search terms once you've let the companies know that you're interested in these topics. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we end up moving from rabbit holes or this theory of communication into actual network factions, groups of people that can identify themselves all across the United States and come together from the wires to the weeds to do some kind of, usually what I'm looking at is political violence. So the SPLC showed that in 2023, they tracked 1,430 hate and anti-government groups across the US. And mostly how they do this tracking is through internet open source intelligence research, as well as looking at police records and arrest records, et cetera. And it plays into even a larger, so beyond just sort of the national organizing of hate groups being so interdependent now with the internet, and because of rabbit holes, they've been able to proliferate. We're also in a situation where we're experiencing and living through net war constantly, all of us. And there's not a lot of great ways to study it, unfortunately. When we talk about cyber war, that's about critical infrastructure. And if the bad dudes are going to are going to shut down the trains and the power or the water. Net war is much more of a tactician's game. That is, they're trying to sway public opinion. So according to a study by Oxford Internet Institute in 2020, cyber troops are government or political party actors tasked with manipulating public opinion online. 81 countries use cyber troops. Cyber troops use social media and the internet as it is designed while employing social engineering techniques like impersonation, bots, and growth hacking. It's very different from hacking or other forms of cyber warfare to directly attack opponents or infrastructure. As well, there's a yearly spend of millions of dollars in online advertising from these identifiable cyber troops. And what that looks like for us, the average everyday information consumer, is that we're not just living in a simulation online, but that we're actually in a splintered reality. And here are some AI-generated images about the conflict in Gaza. So if you were on the Adobe stock photos and you were a journalist trying to put some, images into a new report, these are the kinds of images you would see about Gaza. But these are completely AI created. As well, people were sharing these images of these poor children in this rubble hugging cats as a way to try to evoke anger and sadness in the user. And these were entirely AI generated. It's very interesting too, because a lot of the AI software, they won't produce gore. So even though these children are in rubble, they are unharmed, as are the cats. But this is the kind of information warfare that you end up with on the internet, and it becomes very difficult then to tell fact from simulated, splintered reality. And why this happens is actually quite interesting. So mainstream media has this model of we create the content and we use social media to distribute it. So you go to the New York Times account on Facebook or X or Snapchat, and you're only going to get content from the New York Times. And you can go all these great places to get content from the New York Times. However, other kinds of media outlets, particularly ones that are political, see it in a very different way. They see social media as participatory media. So a little bit of theory here. Rhizomatic communication is the simultaneous use of multiple channels for collecting, sorting, and broadcasting information to raise awareness or coordinate action across different platforms. So a movement or a partisan media outlet will use all of these technologies to their advantage, understanding that the audience is the distribution system, right? This is a crucial shift because when you look at things like, especially right-wing partisan media, these groups will communicate with each other about the day's stories, what should be trending. They'll cover each other's outlet stories in a way that is somewhat familiar, like cable television news. Cable TV news might have a Washington Post reporter come on. But by and large, the right-wing media ecosystem is about delivering politics on the back of news. News is something that people want every day. I argue that news is talk, timely, accurate local knowledge. And people will go back to information sources that give them enough talk. What they don't necessarily want every day is politics. And so to wrap talk in politics, or to wrap timely, accurate local knowledge in politics, is really the only way to keep people interested in politics day in and day out. Of course, there are outliers to this, but most people prefer a newscast that is more about the news and less about political opinion. So it plays out very clearly on social media as a direct affront to democracy. So Cheyenne, who's a journalist that has been for years debunking disinformation stories, will often post something like this every day. He'll say online misinformation is rampant following the escalation of violence between Israel and Hamas today. This video of a tower block in Gaza being hit by a missile is from May 2021, not today. It was captured live during a BBC Arabic broadcast at the time. What's important here is that recontextualized media, or that repackaging of media, is a tactic that media manipulators and disinformers now have as part of their toolkit, and they use it literally every day. As well, they use imposter accounts. Sometimes they'll make up fake fact checks to trick you. They'll use misleading infographics, manipulated video, trolls and brigading, which we'll get into in a minute, evidence collages, hijacked accounts, and hollow sourcing. Just making sure I'm good on time here. Okay. So in terms of networked incitement then, which is the title of this talk, what I'm trying to understand is the relationship between the crazy stuff that's happening online and how it actually shows up in public space. So I talk about networked incitement, which refers to a socio-technical infrastructure where insurgents use multiple platform communication to command and control mobilized social movements in the moment of action. And so I first started writing about this in a paper a few years back called President Trump is Calling Us to Fight. And the idea behind this paper was to look at all of the arrest records and court documents of the 400 out of the 800 people that had been arrested at the Capitol on January 6th. And in looking at those arrest records, what we did was a very simple content analysis talking about, well, are there any statements in here where the arrested person vocalizes their motivation for going to the Capitol that day? And by and large, what we found is that they believed that democracy was coming to an end. And if they didn't step in, that it would have been democracy's ruin. They also believed that Trump had called them to fight and that Trump was going to protect them because many of them knew what they were doing was going to be at least civil disobedience, not necessarily tantamount to crimes. And how it all kicked off was at 10:42 p.m. on December 18th, 2020, so about 2 weeks before January 6th, President Trump tweeted, Peter Navarro releases 36-page report alleging election fraud more than sufficient to swing victory to Trump. Link here. A great report by Peter, statistically impossible to have lost the 2020 election. Big protest in DC on January 6th. Be there, will be wild. And this refrain echoed not just across center and mainstream and leftist media, but everywhere, because that's what kicked people into action. What had been happening prior to that is people were self-organizing protests at different capitals, including the man that I mentioned earlier, Nick Fuentes, was leading a group of America First people in Georgia, and they had gone to Michigan and a few other places to try to get people to protest at Capitol buildings. And Alex Jones and Ali Alexander, who are two other provocateurs that were calling for the overturning of the ballots, they were also organizing smaller protests in different parts of the US. But when Trump centered the focus on January 6th in DC, it's like the temperature changed immediately. It became a lot hotter. And you started to see people not just making plans to go, but creating ride shares and talking about what, if they were going to bring mace and what were or pepper spray and what were the legal laws of the laws in DC about open carry and how close could they get to the Capitol with guns before they had to leave them in their cars. And so you could see these digital traces everywhere. And unfortunately, it just seemed to me like a lot of people were treating it like a storm and drum that people are complaining, but there's nothing really to see here. So what happened that day was astounding. Here are some images from outside and inside the Capitol. And what's striking here in terms of memes is I want you to think about flags as memes. So flags are some of the earliest memes because they denote who's on that team and who's not on that team. And so what's interesting is the invocation of certain kinds of history here. They would, chant things like 1776 will rise again, which is the year of U.S.'s independence from Britain. You even have people dressing as colonialist generals acting out their Civil War fantasies. You have people inside the building flying and wearing Trump regalia. I don't know another president that has their own flag, right? That's something to think about here. As well, you can see in the back of the Patriots, there's a "Don't Tread on Me" yellow flag, which is also fairly ubiquitous in a lot of the other images that I've seen from that day. But what's important here is the optics, which is that these things are incredibly difficult for Trump and the Republican Party to explain away as simply just a normal public protest. But nevertheless, we've been in this contested battle over narrative since this day. So center and left-wing media call this the big lie. And on the right-wing side, this was a total nothing burger. Maybe even Antifa did it. Who knows? Maybe Trudeau did it. I don't even know, right? You know, we can't tell, right? This idea that don't believe your lying eyes. And you can see how that moment really turned the attention of Americans towards the realization that their democracy is actually very fragile, and that in this election, in particular in 2024, that the future of American democracy is what's up for debate. How we define or understand democracy is now not clear. And one of the ways in which this has been capitalized on is because throughout left and progressive politics, patriotism and the use of the American flag have been conceded as not the appropriate symbol, especially if you want to be welcoming and inclusive to immigrants and other cultures and other folks that also live in the US. So the right wing has really been able to hold the line on the symbol of the American flag and also what it means to be a patriot, what it means to be American. They really have a very tight grasp on explaining that meme, because on the left, there is just such a much broader kaleidoscope of people and cultures to be included. And so we don't see representations of American patriotism coming from progressives and even many Democrats. So how did it all end up? You got those thousands of people hanging out, you got people inside the building, and Trump tweets a video at 4:17 p.m. He says, "I know your pain, I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everybody knows it, especially the other side, but you have to go home now. We love you, you're very special. We've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad. It's so evil. I know how you feel, but go home and go in peace." And what happened after that was that people began to walk out of the Capitol, literally just walk out. And they would say things to police officers on the way out saying, "Next time we'll bring the guns," or "It's not going to be this easy to tell us to leave next time." And so as I was thinking about this, I thought, how many times have we been in a situation where a sitting president can call on a private army to try to overthrow the election? And I'm not, I don't really remember any time when this was possible outside of the days of the founding of America in particular, but also the kinds of colonization that has happened across the world. And in a way, this rhetoric does have a kind of recontextualization of colonization going on. So I'll give you one wrap up on this, and then I'm going to go through one example, and I should be done very soon. So to do networked incitement, you normally have to fan the flames of the culture wars by dehumanizing marginalized groups or groups that have trouble representing themselves. You name a target or a person or a place that represents that group on social media, and you encourage your audience to troll or investigate that target. So this is the way I've started to think about networked incitement when it's not the president calling for some kind of public violent interaction. So 2 examples spring to mind. There's an account from a woman that goes by Libs of TikTok on X. And for a while, whenever she would tweet the names of doctors or hospitals that were providing gender affirming care, they would then get bomb threats and other kinds of threats where they would even erase from the website how to get care because they didn't want to be targeted anymore. Same thing with Libs of TikTok posting about LGBTQ content in schools, any schools that had talked about having an inclusive day or a day for reading about other cultures. They were also identified by Libs of TikTok. And then, no surprise, at least a dozen schools were given bomb threats and had harassment following these posts. These are average people that go to work. These aren't people who are out there as activists or any kind of other attention calling to themselves. These are people that are just doing their jobs. And we see this also happen with election officials. So to bring us forward into the contemporary moment, onwards to the meme wars, we got to start talking about cats, right? Because cats are the center of the meme hemisphere. In a 2021 interview with Fox News host Tucker Carlson, then Senate candidate Vance complained that the US was being run by Democrats, corporate oligarchs, and a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. So that's the VP, right? He's the VP candidate, JD Vance, and he said this. And instantly it turned into a meme when the Harris campaign, so Kamala's campaign, dug out this footage and put it out in the world. And then immediately you started to see the childless cat lady memes and how much everybody loves cats. But Vance wasn't just pulling on this loose thread here. Instead, there's a long history of equating women and cats with like being domestic, I should say, and the right to vote. So the suffragette movement, which is women who did try to become voters and that fought for the right for women to vote, also were portrayed in cartoons where as whining cats, or cats were portrayed in domestic situations where the husband now has to take care of the household. The idea that the suffragette is a wants to get away with tomcats and they want to get rid of men, and so all of those layers of what we see today in the assumptions about childless cat ladies in politics begins with the suffragette movement. And then there was also this really neat kind of inversion of that by the suffragettes who took dignified pictures of cats in hats, for instance, saying we should vote for women. And then they also portrayed themselves as cats because men, police officers who didn't want women to have the right to vote would take the suffragettes and put them in prison. And the suffragettes would go on a hunger strike so that they could continue their protest. And they would get very sick, and then they would be force fed. And so it became known as the Cat and Mouse Act, because once they started force feeding these women, they would become too sick and be let out of jail, and then they would get caught again and go back into jail. So this cat and mouse thing continued for some time. As well, we all know black cats are the best cats, number one, but they do come with this hidden history, or this, I guess it's very apparent to me in October in Massachusetts that cats are equated to witchcraft, and they are the sort of demonic familiars of witches. And so cats also have this very other sinister history tied to women that is also being invoked by the idea that someone is a childless cat lady. And so I won't read all of this text, but it ended up being that after calling everybody childless cat ladies, JD Vance and Trump, as well as others on the far right, concocted a plan to tell the public that Haitian immigrants who are in the US legally were eating cats and dogs and the pets in Springfield, Ohio. Now, Vance is the senator of Ohio. He's been asked by the mayor of Springfield not to keep doing this. He's been told numerous times by the time he starts posting about this that it's not true. But nevertheless, he says, in the last several weeks, my office has received many inquiries from actual residents of Springfield who have said their neighbors' pets or local wildlife were abducted by Haitian migrants. It's possible, of course, that all of these rumors will turn out to be false. He goes on, and then at the second part of the tweet, he says, in short, don't let the crybabies in the media dissuade you, fellow patriots. Keep the cat memes coming. And this created a whole onslaught of memes about cats, but now they had been inverted. They're no longer the bad thing that, represent women and their misery, but instead that Trump is the savior of animals, and Trump is going to free us from the scourge of migrants. Mind you, they're here legally, totally legal. What ends up happening is a flurry of posts online, millions of views on images like this of a man who had actually picked up a dead goose and was just moving it out of the street. His image was recontextualized to say, that the ducks and the pets are disappearing. This starts to feel like evidence, right? You're down the rabbit hole. The algorithms on TikTok, this happened to me personally, started showing me videos of people torturing animals because people were searching for tortured animals. So it became popular on TikTok. As well, we had investigative journalists dig in and find out that the woman who made the original Facebook post that claimed that a cat was missing and that she had thought she saw it skinned and hanging from a branch actually is the cat in the bottom of this picture here. Her name's Miss Sassy, and she was just locked in the basement. She's such a fuzzy buddy. I can't blame Miss Sassy for this. It's got to be the racism, right? So how does it play out? Well, online, what gets interesting is you start to see the yellows of don't snack on me, don't tread on me. You start to see the invocation of Springfield and the Simpsons because they lived in Springfield. So the animals, I'm voting for Trump. You have other pop culture references. Many of you may or may not remember Alf, who was the alien that ate cats. As well, you've got Elon Musk tweeting to tens of millions, this image of the Simpsons cat dying. And he says, Ohio right now. As well, you start to see AI schlock, right? These and it's weird that the cats have guns but it's all put together with this political imagination of what they think will be funny and what will get shared. Even, making fun of things like Black Lives Matter with Cat Lives Matter. I'd rather you grabbed me than ate me, an obvious reference to a gross thing Trump had said, as well as images of Trump rescuing ducks and kittens. These kinds of images proliferated everywhere. It was a massive explosion across the web. And so what ended up happening? Well, as you may realize, something really bad happened, which is that troopers had to patrol schools in Springfield after threats linked to false claims about Haitian immigrants. 4 days of threats in Springfield, a timeline of lockdowns, closures after Post claiming Haitians ate pets. We're talking government buildings, schools, colleges, hospitals, all on high alert. As well, Springfield facing threats from overseas after Trump's lies about Haitians. So it's not just that local people are terrorizing or US people are terrorizing Springfield, but also the threats are coming from overseas. And this leads me to my final point, which actually is a very interesting place to end up. Will we see damages for disinformation? So there's a Haitian group in Springfield who's filed citizen criminal charges against Trump and Vance for the kinds of dehumanizing rhetoric that has led to loss of work and fear and people, not going out to restaurants and not wanting to be out in public places because they're afraid of what might happen. And then as well, from the Haitian Times 4 days ago, Haitian diaspora groups sue Trump, Vance, and others for $550 million over false claims targeting immigrants. And so we'll see if these strategies work. I mean, they do seem to have some civil rights merit to them, but we don't know at all what the final outcome will be at this point. This is just breaking news. So lastly, when I think about this, I think about meme wars and social media. Social media, no longer an emerging technology imbued with the possibility of fostering social change by giving voice to small groups. Social media has become a tool of the powerful to dominate, harass, and coerce vulnerable groups. If we do not acknowledge this shift, the freest speech will benefit only those who are already powerful. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joan. Can you hear me? I'm not sure if my mic is on yet.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that really stimulating talk. We are going to have a couple of volunteers in the room here with microphones for folks who would like to ask a question. And I'm also going to be watching the Slido online submission portal, particularly for our friends on the live stream. But while we're getting that up and running, maybe I will use moderator's privilege to ask a first question, which is, I'm just thinking a lot during your talk about the history of our field in communication studies and the way that these questions about media influence, media impacts, and effects have kind of bedeviled all of our concerns about the media for kind of its entire history. I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit about how you see your work kind of positioned in that tradition in the field.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I ended up I kind of fell backwards into the comm school at BU. I'm more of a sociologist, historian. I understand, I'm not making an argument that's like, oh, tell people what to do and they'll do it. What I'm saying is that there has to be, and this is very science studies, what my approach is that the ground has to be laid and the possibilities have to be sort of in the air for these kind of massive collective effects, right? I'm not making necessarily a quantitative argument other than to say it's all around us and anywhere you look, you're going to find it once you know what to look for. And so for me, media effects has been a really difficult thing because on the one hand, something like voting, actually voting, is a pretty hardened position. Not many people change their the political party that they're part of, and they become very calcified in their political positions. I do think, though, in terms of media effects, that we do ourselves a disservice by not recognizing the nuance in these patterns, which is to say that violence is not always random. Violence is something that can be, to some degree, anticipated, not predicted, but anticipated. And so, like on the day of January 6th, I knew it was going to be a very violent day because I knew that there were thousands of people going with the intention of overthrowing the electorate, or, overthrowing the ballots. I had the same feeling about the race riot in Charlottesville in 2017 because I did a lot of research and was able to see the layers of planning and ride shares, and even the way in which they coordinated purchasing the tiki torches for the Charlottesville March. If you're not familiar with it, there was a big white supremacist uprising that killed a woman in August of 2017 in Charlottesville. But in the lead up to that, it was all being planned on Discord. And they were saying, hey, if you're driving from anywhere, away, stop on your way at the Home Depots and pick up the tiki torches and we'll pay you for them when you get here. Right. And so you start to realize, okay, like there's something else going on here. There's some other drive. And in sociology, we also, understand emotions a little bit differently than, say, a psychologist would. But things that gain momentum, like we talk about protest momentum, that's also important here. So, for instance, for January 6th to happen, you have to have a series of practice protests in the lead up to that so that people go there and they have a sense of what to do. We saw this in the civil rights movement in the US, where people didn't just go and do counter sit-ins. They drilled how to take over a Woolworths counter, how to take over a Greyhound bus and get Black patrons either at the counter or on the bus. And so those things were very tactical. And so I found that the lens of social movement research has been much more useful as I think about what I put together as ABCD, actors, behavior, content, and design. But I don't have any, other than history, I don't have any way of saying, well, 24% of people ended up this way. But I do understand that the media effects literature is vast. And I'm also open to any encouraging criticism about where I might find some allies here.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a question from the internet. And Katrina Brady of the internet asks, why do you think the use of social media has caused so much disinformation and polarization in politics? Big one.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a few things going on here. One of them, of course, is something that's very prevalent in the comm literature. There's been a breakdown of gatekeepers, which is to say that, you have many more conduits for publishing. I think Habermas was the one who said that the printing press turned us all into readers and the internet has turned us all into publishers. And so, we can talk about how much as a function simply of how ubiquitous publishing has become. The other thing is that it seems to be the tactic of the time. It's not going to be like this forever. There will be instances where, for instance, you don't see this kind of behavior on, let's say, not TikTok, Twitch, because Twitch knows essentially who its audience is and that what the audience is for. And they have a very quick ban policy that if you fall out of the lines of Twitch moderation, they're not going to appease you. They're not going to go back and forth like YouTube does, and they're certainly not going to let you become so big and so powerful that banning you would merit them criticism in a major, press outlet. I think one of the things that YouTube could learn, or some of these old legacy platforms could learn from some of the newer ones, is sort of a low tolerance for community harm. Not to say that Twitch is perfect, not to say that Wikipedia is perfect, but they do seem to have revisionary systems built in that don't reward abuse. Unfortunately, with things like X or YouTube, sometimes abuse is profitable, which is to say that, there was a time when you could make a living out of hyping up scientific racism on YouTube. And I watched it for years and did as much research as I could and interventions as I could to try to show them how damaging this product is to young people who are just now exploring, say, racial identities, and they want to know, what these differences might mean, if they mean anything at all. So I do think, yeah, that why it's become so vitriolic, though, is a function of the loss of gatekeepers and then the sheer, the untold spoiled rewards you get from doing things that are both novel and outrageous, which is essentially like what conspiracy is nobody's going to tell you this. I'm going to be the only one, and you can only get it here. And that's how people end up coming back over and over and over again to the same, polluted water.
If there are any questions in the room, we can get a hand up, and one of our volunteers will come with a microphone, right?
Hi, thank you so much, Doctor. I just wanted to ask, and I know you touched about it briefly in your most recent response about Discord, but what is the role of forums in your theory of networked incitement, and what do you think in terms of moderation, for example, should be done both at an institutional level with those kinds of websites and also from sort of a societal perspective from us as citizens of a digital society?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I wrote this, remember how we all got on Zoom? Like there was this pandemic, you probably heard of it. And like we all had to go on Zoom and like talk to each other just like this. I decided to do a really short research paper on Zoom bombing because it struck me that there was this moment in time where we were reckoning with rapid adoption of a new technology. The technology itself wasn't inherently built for the public. It was a B2B platform, business to business. And so when you're a business person and you buy a conference calling software, you have expectations that that software is going to be secure, that your messaging is going to be encrypted, that no one's going to be able to show up in the middle of your discussion. But what Zoom introduced, because we rolled it out in such a chaotic and open environment, is that you saw a lot of technological experimentation with the edges of it. And when I say experimentation, I think I mean like pranking and shenanigans. So, some of my favorite ones were, a professor is given a lecture and someone who's not supposed to be in the class is in the class, interrupting and saying crazy things. So some of it was funny, sort of like prank phone calls can be funny, but it turned really malicious very quickly. And people started interrupting Alcoholics Anonymous meetings to talk about, beer that they like. And they started interrupting, meetings of LGBTQ teens, and they started interrupting professors that were talking about wedge issues like race and immigration. And so you started to see very quickly that it wasn't just, oh, this new technology is on the market, we have some things we need to do to deal with it. But also you saw the whatever the opposite of wisdom of the crowds is. But you did see people kind of come in and try to say, that these are appropriate uses of the technology, or at least possible uses of the technology. And then we ended up with security protocols. Zoom patched its software, it reset the openness of the software so that you did have to click through and actually make the meeting open. It instituted a hosting function so nobody could come in and just, draw wieners on the whiteboard, although still funny, right, guys? Still funny, but not a good look. I say that just to say that, like, there's these moments in time where we do have to reckon with a new technology and we can adapt and we can fix it. And now Zoom doesn't have those same problems. Now, with message board culture, what you have are these message boards where a lot of the Zoom bombing was getting organized. And someone would go on to a message board like 4chan and start a thread that says, my political science class starts in 10 minutes. Like, wouldn't hate it if one of you showed up. And so you started to realize that these message boards are actually much more tactical than I think many people had anticipated. Even the Nick Fuentes manipulating Twitter during the presidential debate to make his group name trend was a very clear example to me that what's broken is really around the seams of these platforms, and that you can have a brigade forming on 4chan or Reddit, or but is there anybody in security at Twitter or Facebook looking for that? And usually the answer is no. This is why research that I do tends to be very open-ended in terms of where we will look for things, because we often look in unsuspecting places because sometimes it's just that obvious that that's where they're going to organize. The other thing is, I think the reporting on message boards has been really terrible over the years. So we don't really have a few beat reporters that really understand the culture of different message boards, right? So everything is 4chan, it's not. But unfortunately, the technology of the message board is just so fundamental to the web that I think we forget how important it is as part of the sort of hiving aspect of the hive and the swarm of trolling and brigading.
All right, thank you. While maybe some more people get ideas together, if there are any, I'll go back to the
We've got one behind you.
Someone behind me. Goodness.
Yes, there's a young woman behind you. Other side, Benjamin, turn to the other side. Yeah, there you go.
I'm just trying to formulate this question in my head. Thank you for your presentation, but
no problem at all.
Yeah. So I know the examples you shared were like examples of like Trump and Vance, and then while I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about more leaderless movements like QAnon, where it's not one narrative that's passed down, but kind of develops on its own. I'm just wondering how you would apply this to situations like that.
Yeah. So what's interesting even about seemingly leaderless movements is they do have, I would say, constellations or, a few different network actors that are the most important. So what became really interesting about the phenomenon of QAnon is it was a reaction to Pizzagate. Pizzagate gets banned on all kinds of platforms. So the Watkins, which is a couple of pig farmers in the Philippines that run online servers for very disgusting pornography. They spin up a website called 8chan where you can have all the conversation you want about Pizzagate. And that's where QAnon arrives. And QAnon is this cryptic figure that should have White House level clearance. He's telling people, don't worry, Trump is going to lock up Hillary and Mueller's in on it and everything's going to be fine. And there had been allegations all along the way that maybe it was Bannon, maybe it was General Flynn or people in General Flynn's network that were doing this, but it was one of the more interesting large-scale psychological experiments in human history, because thousands, if not tens of thousands of people at least signed up for and were interested in getting this information. And what's really sad to me about QAnon, unfortunately, is because at the very core of that conspiracy theory is the notion that children are being harmed. And what it does is it actually triggers a deeply emotional response from people who also have been harmed. And they start to feel like it's their moral duty to take care of these kids and to be on the lookout for it because now they know. And when they were younger, nobody protected them. And so they're going to be in service and called into justice. And it didn't help the world at all that this is happening at the exact same time that the Stephen Epstein case is unfolding. And you are finding out that there are networks of very rich men that are exploiting women and children, and that is not a lie. And it involves planes and, underground tunnels and all the stuff that the Diddy stuff is happening now around. And so I will not be surprised to see a kind of conspiracy arise out of the Diddy moment that probably tries to link back to QAnon in some way. Which is all to say that when you study conspiracy theories, a few things become very apparent, which is people who like conspiracies like all of them. It's like they don't pick and choose, like, I'm into this one, but this one, no. Like they really get sucked into, and some of them have their, it's aliens from outer space, it's it's the aliens that live at the center of the earth, or it's never climate change. It's like unfortunately, the bad people or the bad things are out there, and that there's only one or two ways to get the right information, right? And that you also have to proselytize and be part of the movement. That's a big part of this. And I think QAnon was really successful especially during the pandemic, because people had so little to hold on to, especially people with very small social networks. That idea that you're part of something bigger than yourself is so compelling. And it did draw in not just people who are interested in saving children, but also a lot of women got involved, especially when that movie came out on Netflix, Cuties. So they became, all of a sudden, they were like moral saviors of Hollywood, because this is where they saw the exploitation happening. Which is to say, like, as someone who is an activist, I'm kind of heartened by the fact that people are willing to go an extra mile to prove or to be part of a social issue. What's really sinister about all of this, though, is that we don't know who's behind it. And when disinformation mobilizes, you don't get civil rights, you get political violence. And that's just very different from the way that we've celebrated civic participation in the past. Thank you for your question.
I am going to go to one online just a second. There's a question here about the role that memes have played in introducing more radical and extreme ideas into mainstream political campaigns. Could you talk about that role?
Yeah, so there's a great book called The Propagandist Playbook, and also all of the research of Francesca Tripodi is relevant here. The idea that, wait, can you repeat the question just so I'm thinking about one of her studies, but it might not be the most relevant one.
The question was, how have memes introduced
Oh, the
more
mainstream, that's
extreme
right.
ideas into mainstream political campaigns?
Yeah, so she had this really interesting way of talking about, making hate mainstream. And a lot of it has to do with, in political science, we talk about the shifting of the Overton window, this idea that, there's only so many ways we can think about political resistance in the tactics of political resistance, and what we think is appropriate is within this window. And then on the outsides, are things that are not acceptable, like using violence to cause terror, or things like unjust military action to intimidate, these kinds of things. But when it comes to hate becoming mainstream, some of the things that she and I researched together were really interesting. And I think Heidi Breck at the Global Center for Extremism also agrees that we're seeing a process of self-radicalization of some of these folks. So someone like Dylan Roof, for instance, who was a mass murderer that killed 9 parishioners at a church in Charleston, South Carolina, he did it to kick off a race war. And he chose the Black patrons at this church because he had put his manifesto online, and he believed the political violence would spark interest in his ideas, and then down the line, it would mobilize racial warriors. This was exactly the same political philosophy of Charles Manson. So Manson believed that if he killed a white pregnant woman and blamed it on a Black man, it would kick off a race war in Los Angeles. And so these kinds of thoughts are out there and they spread. But the difference between Manson and Roof is that Manson had to convince a bunch of people to do the violence for him. And he had to kind of raise a very cultish group of people to enact this brutality. But now with the use of semi-automatic weapons, and also the ability to tell the story even after one might even be murdered or killed in doing these kind of violent acts. This kind of violence has become, unfortunately, somewhat very patterned and normalized in our society. And we're no longer shocked, unfortunately, that political violence is going to happen. And it's no longer an anomaly. I mean, President Trump has had 2 assassination attempts in the past few months, where the person got pretty close. That's unheard of, really, in politics, and it should be. But I think the normalization of violence and the outcomes of violence are part and parcel of why we end up normalizing hate. The last thing I'll say on this, which I think is really important for meme wars, is that white supremacists, when they talk about producing memes and trying to get you laugh about, or trying to get you to question something, like a statement where they put up on a lot of college campuses flyers that just say it's okay to be white. They say nothing else on them, but they're trying to provoke a kind of reaction from people. White supremacists believe that if they can get you laughing about racism, they can eventually get you to defend it on the grounds of free speech. And that's a very Americanist way of thinking about it. But unfortunately, that's that's where the normalization comes in. If we are joking about and normalizing hatred towards Haitians and this idea that they, how many different ethnicities and races have, been demonized as eating animals over the years, right? Like this is just one of hundreds. But nevertheless, it's a very potent way to dehumanize and also disrespect a large group of people that have no real representation in their own voice. And so, for me, the call to action that I give to all of you is to think about that, and in your own spaces and places, be a good advocate for the truth and call it out when you see it, that someone's, hedging on irony or trying to get a rise out of people using dehumanizing rhetoric. I think, we are our own best advocates, and as university students in particular, it's incumbent upon you to know how to be and how to talk in the world that is respectful and honors people's dignity, right? And one of the things that I think really distinguishes Canadians from everybody else in the world is how open and welcoming and interested your communities are in peace, right? I'm in a country that loves to go to war. They don't do peace studies. The first time I even heard about peace studies was at Concordia. I was like, oh, that sounds like a good idea, a good thing to study.
Right, we'll go to Wagner.
Hi.
Hello.
Last year, Rumble voluntarily stopped its services to Brazil, and this year, justice from the Supreme Court banned Twitter from the country a few weeks ago, actually, and also Rumble is now officially banned from Brazil. Initially, I thought that this would open a precedent for other countries around the world who to do the same. But I'm getting, less, I don't think that's going to happen. But I guess in the meantime, we have a mayoral election happening in the city of São Paulo, which is like the biggest city in Latin America with over 11 million people living there. And the fact that Twitter got banned is working as fuel to far-right politicians. And in the meantime, online far-right communities are moving to other platforms like Telegram, WhatsApp. So it seems to me that legal retaliation, even though in theory is good, I don't know how effective it actually is. And the other side of the coin, the flip side of the coin is that the same justice that banned Twitter also went ahead and banned VPN use. He went back after, but he started taking some legal measures that are very questionable. And Brazil was a military dictatorship for years and years, so there is a long history of authoritarianism in the country. So I guess my question is how to hold platforms accountable without leaning towards authoritarian measures from the government and giving far-right collectives even more fuel during campaigns.
Yeah, it's a conundrum. I mean, you are really essentially describing the paradoxes of technology, which is you can't have all of the bad without, you can't have all of the good without all of the bad, right? You can build technology in different ways so that things like credible information circulates at higher rates than, let's say, generic or general information. It used to be the case, it still is in the States, and I know in Canada as well, that you have a right to things like television and the news on television, at least local news. But there is no such right to platforms. And what we are seeing now play out in Brazil, in the US around TikTok, is a border war about how to govern the internet and whose borders are going to be enforced and whose borders are not going to be enforced. And this, to me, is incredibly destructive on the one hand. The big promise of a free and open internet is that we would be able to communicate for free across the globe. And, you know, if anybody remembers the pain of having to spend, you know, $1 for a minute to call your grandma, you know, a few states away or a few provinces away, then you know how important all of this free communication, or free as in you got to pay to access, you know, through ISPs, internet service providers. But by and large, a lot of the services you're using are free to the user. I think that that's going to change. I think we're going to see more or less a transition period where countries are going to force, I think, many platforms to become closed businesses, which is to say that even in Canada, you have Meta blocking the news. They're still doing that, right? Which is annoying, because then you got to go to archive.is, or you have to, you know, click on the VPN and get around it some way. And it's just a whole extra load of nonsense. And it goes against the actual design principle of the internet, which is designed on hyperlinks. Like you are the very substrata, the very way in which the net nets is through hyperlinks. And what you have are platform companies now behaving more like channels on the TV, right? You can go on that network and get that content and be part of that social network. And, you know, we might just be part of the generation where that was free. And the next generation is going to have to pay for it. And in paying for it, there will be other kinds of regulations and rules about behavior on platforms. People also will be much less likely to spin up anonymous accounts, or, you know, Finstagrams, or any other kind of fake social media. And so I do think that these things are going away. The other thing about state power is what I've been learning is that tech companies are not accountable to the state. And so the experiences, the experiments that are happening in Brazil right now, other countries are watching very closely to see how these companies react. And if these companies, they'll then say, well, fine, we won't serve your market ever again. And this could be really damaging, not necessarily for, let's say, Twitter, but Facebook for a lot of people is their calendar. It's how they get in touch with their doctor. I mean, it's so much more than just a friendship network for a lot of people. And so taking away Facebook and breaking links within Facebook really actually damages the democratic nature of what we thought we were collectively building with the internet before it became such a commodity. The last thing I'll say about the far right is they're sneaky. They're going to be on every platform. There's really no way to ban them. The hard thing is you do not want them to scale or be able to raise resources. Once hate becomes a job, people are very reluctant to quit. And I've only seen people quit being racist, especially on YouTube, when it started to affect their money. You know, gamers who had become vicious misogynist during Gamergate and hating women and hating, people of color, and then realizing that they're going to get removed from YouTube, sent them back to just critiquing the games that they were playing.
I know we could keep going for a long time just based on the queue of questions that are building up on this trusty little iPad, let alone what people have in their brains here in the room, but it is getting late. So I think we will call things here. Thank you again so much, Joan, for being with us and sharing your work. I will invite the audience to join me in thanking our Attallah lecturer for this year.
Thank you guys so much. It was really an honor. And it sounds like Paul was a fun guy. I'm sad I didn't get to meet him, but I will come back to Carleton. We'll hang out. We'll find a way.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, and good night.
Good night, everybody.